book discussion, The Son of Nobody by Yann Martel. This is a philosophical novel bridging ancient Greek philosophy, in particular Homer's Iliad, with today's life. The author is trying to give a sense for where Western culture originates from. And the Iliad is one of the first literary pieces that was written, at least to our knowledge. And more importantly, one of those types of literary pieces that survived millennia and is still the foundation of a lot of Western philosophy, Western ideas. For example, the concept of heroism, the concept of sacrifice, the concept of loss, the concept of charity. A lot of ideas that originate in the Iliad find their way through the Judaism into Christianity, and therefore obviously are very instrumental for Western culture today. So the author makes this big leap from the Iliad in today's life. And I think that in itself is a great idea. I think it's a laudable idea. And unfortunately, I think the execution is a bit lacking here. Sometimes the parallels a little bit too much. It just feels a bit constructed. It feels a bit like, come on, really? But nevertheless, the idea to connect the Iliad and the Trojan War with actual contemporary modern life, in this case, it's actually a philosopher, a classic scholar who goes to Oxford and reads a fragment of the Iliad, which was not written by Homer, actually. It was written by normal people. And the author makes this big connection here, and I think that is actually very well done, where he says, look, Homer is the idealization of the war, and that's what survived. And the common people's history of the war, whether that war actually happened or not is not even sure, but we have fragments of history. Now, I don't know if that's fiction or real, but let's leave that aside. There is this idea that common people have been writing about the Trojan War, and the difference between Homer's writing and the common people's writing is literally the difference between idealized philosophy and real life. And there are parallels. There are definitely also differences. For example, one of the differences is that in Homer's Odyssey, the Odyssey and in the Iliad, there is heroism, there is killing, there is glory, and there is very little pain, there is very little love, loss, orphanage, widows, like things that war brings to the surface. That the author is very conscious about, because he starts the book by telling a story of his grandfather who was in a war, I think it was Vietnam, and actually left the US to Canada for that reason, and really thought war is a very bad thing. So the author is definitely bringing that across, that the idealized wars, particularly in antiquity, maybe not today, but in antiquity, and wars that have been fought for, often the wrong reasons. And this is part of the story here that the author is trying to tell us here, that the actual reason of the Trojan War was stupidity. It was some, female, male love story. Somebody abducted somebody. I don't know the details. It doesn't matter. But it's often that the kings find reasons to fight, and the people who actually fight, who suffer, they don't even know why they're in it. And the Trojan War, in that sense, is a very good example. And I don't know if the author wanted to draw this parallel, but there's also a little bit of a parallel of today, and also a parallel to Orwell, the perpetual war. The enemy is friend and then enemy and friend again. We're exactly in that type of situation where one day we're friends with Iraq, then we fight a war with them, then we fight, we're friends with Israel, and obviously right now we're not friends with Israel anymore, even though we pretend to be friends with Israel. We're supposed to fight a war with Iran. Nobody wants to fight that war. Like there's this absurd, almost like Iliadesque absurdity here, where decades of fighting for what? And the author is in the book, the modern version, the narrator goes to Oxford to read fragments of. Now the story is the following. Apparently, in Egypt, Egypt was part of the Greek Empire that I think it was Alexander the Great gave Egypt to one of of his generals. He ran Egypt, and there was a town somewhere, not on the banks of the Nile, but there was a town, and the people there wrote stuff down. And at some point, there was a drought, and somehow the water disappeared. Maybe they diverted the Nile or something. There was no more water there. It was the middle of the desert, and basically everybody left, but the writings were preserved because there was no water, there was no humidity at all. It's the Sahara Desert. These writings survived, and this scholar is now in Oxford reading those writings, and amongst many, and these writings are very common folk type writings. There is no Homeric, poetry, glorification of the past. It's just common stuff, household quarrels, problems, revenge, love, hate, and amongst that also illusions or attributes to something which could have been the Trojan War. And what the author is finding is the difference between Homer. Well, the gist of this book is to separate the glorification of the classic philosophy with the actual facts and the real life of the people and what they went through, in particular as it pertains to war. And I think the author did a good job in that sense. I think it's that's why I think the idea is phenomenal. It's a very creative way to connect the classics and to answer the question, where do we come from? It's very creative. I just think the execution is a little bit lacking. So I think I want to mention 3 points. One, again, I think the difference between glorification of philosophy or observation is theory laden, history is theory laden. We start with a theory, and the theory was ingrained in our heads. Glorification, heroes, kings, Alexander the Great. We don't call him Alexander the Butcher, we call him Alexander the Great. The winners write history, but then also the common people write history. And that's very often very different. But nevertheless, the question where, and this is the second point, where does Western culture really come from? And Western culture comes from a very complicated relationship between the king and the people. And I think that has been, it's been a theme throughout the millennia. There's the king and there's the people, and there is sacrifice, there is a lot of suffering, and the king has to be accountable for that. The king cannot get away with that. The people stand up to the king, maybe not through revolution all the time, but they definitely stand up. There is a relationship between the king and the people. This is not absolutism. And I think that is the fundamental idea of Western culture. And that's why Western culture developed the law, the constitutional law. That's why we developed theory and philosophy the way we did. Not that other cultures didn't develop theory and philosophy, but our philosophy is absolutely based on this concept of, hey, listen, you can't just do what you want. And the concept of sacrifice, I think what the author here is alluding to, and I don't want to go this far, but there is a concept of sacrifice in Western culture where you sacrifice your offspring to get to sail with the winds, which means you need to do a big sacrifice in life to go ahead. And in this particular novel, it's about sacrificing offsprings, and that's very difficult to read, whether it's the classic version or even in the modern version. There's a very tragic situation happening, and that's of course very difficult to read whenever young people die for no reason. That's very, very difficult to read. So the author did a good job actually dramatizing that situation and really getting it across. You really feel it. So I think that's the second point. And I think the third point I want to say is just the concept of war. I think we forget that sometimes. I think it's worth, particularly in the times that we are today, it's just any kind of comment, book, article, podcast, whatever, that highlights the atrocities of war and that brings across the concept that war is bad, just bad. It's horrible and it needs to be avoided. And the best way to avoid war is through deterrence, to not fight, the fight without the fight. So to summarize, the Son of Nobody is a great attempt to connect classic philosophy with modern life and give us the answer to the question, where is Western culture coming from? Some of the execution is lacking, but overall it's a great idea. It's an interesting concept. It brings up some really fundamental ideas. For example, the concept of sacrifice in Western culture, the concept of accountability by the king, and also the idea that the war and the heroism of war is not the whole story. There is also real human lives. There are real human lives, and human suffering is connected to heroism. And Western culture, I think, has been very good at emerging that concept into our philosophy, into our law, into our culture. And I think it's very important that we remind ourselves that is the case. Thank you.